Really good stuff, Brian. There's some really cool music coming out of the UK, actually in a Catholic revival, which is very interesting. And that's some of the stuff that Brian's doing. Actually, Brian, I got to tell you, I like what you did with that better than the original artist. So thank you. Good stuff, man. Really good. So anyway, we've got a special guest with us today. We're taking just 1 week pause on God Can't. I'll be teaching the next 2 weeks to finish out the last 2 chapters of God Can't on October 6th and 13th, and we'll be having praxis on those weeks as well, so look forward to that. Have you enjoyed God Can't, by the way? Okay, thank you for saying yes. I'm really happy about that. I think it has been really provocative and stretching for me. I think I've said that at different times, but it's been very freeing as well. And just being able to get a different understanding, a different construct on some pretty significant theological areas is really helpful in how we relate to God and how we pray and how we operate. And the next 2 chapters are going to continue to help you in that regard. And it is building toward its chapter 5, which, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's worth hanging in there for. So look forward to that. Today we have a special guest, and he's a newer friend of mine. I met him, not even a year ago, knew of him over a year ago. His name is Douglas Avilesbernal, and he is the executive minister of the Evergreen Association of the American Baptist Churches USA. And previously, our church was a part of Growing Healthy Churches, which was also known as the American Baptist Churches of the West, since our inception, really, in 1860. And then about a year ago, as I was relieved from my staff position with Growing Healthy Churches, because of some positions I was taking on inclusion and equality, I was also informed that it would be really wise for us to remove our church from Growing Healthy Churches because we're not aligned theologically with where Growing Healthy Churches is. And so it was kind of a deal like, well, either do it or it's going to be done to you kind of a thing. And so the board and I processed it together and made a shift and found a home still within American Baptist Churches, but with the Evergreen Association, which you're going to hear a little bit about. So you get 2 things today. It's a twofer with Doug. First, you get a little bit of an overview of Evergreen, and it's really cool. I'm really excited about so many things about Evergreen. One is it's a welcome space for churches like us to still be an association and contribute and find support and all the way around. But then the way they operate, the way they're organized is completely unique. And I think it's really compelling. And I'm going to be learning more about that and what the implications might be for our church as well. So it could be really cool. And then he's got a great message to bring too. I know you're going to love it. First service loved it. In fact, the first service was very responsive. So if you need to be responsive, people. Otherwise, the 8:30 wins the crown today. So be on your A game, all right? Please welcome with me Douglas Avilesbernal.
Thanks. Good to see you. All right. Thanks. I'm so glad to be here with you all. It really is a joy for me to meet you and get to know you. So I guess I'll start by sharing a little bit about Evergreen and who we are. We were born as a space in the middle of conflict. And the reason was as our world was opening up, our churches were also opening up to welcoming a broader spectrum of theology and thinking, and some people just could not take that. There was a big struggle, a big war, in a compromise was the birth of a new region of American Baptist churches. Usually, American Baptist churches regions are defined by the area in which they are. So that's why we have American Baptist churches of New Jersey, American Baptist churches of the Dakotas, American Baptist churches of Chicago, Metro New York State, etc. Evergreen came to be as a non-geographic American Baptist region. And the idea was for it to be a welcoming space for many. Originally, the idea was a welcoming space for churches that felt they wanted to welcome LGBTQ folks. What has happened since is that it's grown into a welcoming space of the full spectrum of our faith. So we live in this beautiful world where about 40% of our churches as Evergreen have no interest in being welcoming and affirming. The same is on the other side, and we have everything in the middle, and we all live together in a very, very wonderful way, and I think a very Christian way. You know, so often what I say is, if you disagree with someone who is also Christian, the worst thing you could do is completely separate yourself from them. But the best thing we could do is to engage and learn from each other and with each other. So that's sort of what Evergreen is. Now, the way we function is, in essence, is we do our system is designed to spread power as much as we can and to foster and encourage fellowship equally. And the way we carry that out is that we are divided, constructed, built in caucuses. And these are ethnic caucuses. So we have a Euro caucus, a Black caucus, Asian caucus, and Latino caucus. Usually when people first hear this, it feels like the opposite of what it ought to be. People often have accused us of saying, why aren't you just doing more of the separating then when you do that? And the way we explained it is that there are profound cultural aspects of who we are that are rooted in these places where we have grown and we belong, and the way we learn, the way we hear, the way we think about things are rooted in that, and sometimes it is easier to explore those in that safe space so that we could then grow into greater community. So I'll explain it in this way. Whenever we have to make a choice as an association, we come together first and we express the question or the issue or the choice we have to make. And then we split into our caucuses to discuss that question in our own spaces. And the reason we do that is because the way we relate to each other, the way we arrive at choices, the way we discuss things is different. For example, in the Asian caucus, everybody knows that as soon as the oldest person in the room states an opinion, that is what everyone is doing, period. Right? So in the Asian caucus, everybody knows that whoever the oldest is there, that person gets to decide. Whenever he or she says their opinion, the rest of the people have no room to go against that. Right? So once they express their opinion, that's what we do. So of course, they work that differently, right? In essence, what that means is that everyone chats with that oldest person before the meeting, expresses their opinion, so by the time you get to the meeting, that person knows. And then but that would not work in the Euro caucus. I mean, can you imagine in the Euro caucus, suddenly whoever the oldest is, whatever she says or he says, that's it. They express their opinion, you're done. The meeting is over. Would you be able to do that? The Black caucus meetings tend to be very, very loud, and you have to be an extrovert to get your word out in that group. I mean, if you're not, if you wait your turn, well, you're not going to have one. So we split into these groups so you could comfortably and at home look through this choice, and then we all come back together. Each of the caucuses reports their view on the issue, and it isn't until then that we begin to consider the choice we're going to make as a family. What we love about this is that when we come together, we get to hear different perspectives, different views on the issue from people and places that we could not otherwise see. So it feels like, and it tends to be that when we come back together, we have a broad perspective on the issue from various points of view, various perspectives, and also everyone feels heard. All of that together, I think, helps us come up with wiser choices that are better for the community in the long run. That's why we separate into these groups. But our system would not work without those three components. Everyone hearing the issue together at the same time, everyone discussing it within their own home environment, sharing it with the community, and then we decide. Now, so that's why we split into caucuses. And then now, the way we built in keeping power from pooling in one place is, one example is that we have an executive committee. The executive committee is made up of 2 representatives from each of the caucuses. Each caucus gets 2 representatives. Each caucus decides who their representatives are going to be. And if I try to tell a caucus which the representatives should be, they will tell me where to go very quickly. And that is the opposite of how our regions normally work, or companies work. Usually you want the executive to decide who his, and generally it's a he, right? His executive committee is going to be, because he has the vision and he knows who's going to help him implement that vision. We go the opposite way. And one of the reasons I like that is that it helps keep my humanity in check. Because if I were to choose our executive committee, I would probably choose one that would be best for me, that would make things easier for me, that would very likely carry my vision. Now the problem with that is that we're Baptist. So I'm not the bishop. I don't decide, we decide. So in this other system, the community decides, and then I have to figure out a way to work with what the community has chosen. And it's a beautiful way to help us from ourselves. You know, of course we make mistakes, but by spreading this, by making it open and broad, and this way, it helps us hear the Spirit better, because we don't only think that the Spirit could come from one place. Right? Now, the fairness of this is remarkable, because, for example, if we were to make choices by number of people, our Black caucus would win every time. If we were to make choices by number of individual churches, our Euro caucus would win all the time. And our Asian and Latino caucuses would lose every time. But in this way, each caucus, regardless of number of people, number of churches, or size of assets, gets 2 votes, period. It's equity that is remarkable, because everyone is heard. Now, of course, the difficulty with this is that with this expansive freedom comes responsibility. We have worked hard at designing the path for everyone to be heard, but that means you have to be present. If you're not present, we can't hear you. So our system then asks presence from our churches. We do our best to make it easier for everyone, but you still have to make the choice to show up. But when you do, our promise is that we will do our best to hear you out. You may not win every time, but you would also not lose every time. And that feels very Christian to me. Our goal is to nurture community. Our desire is to grow that so that we grow together and to learn from each other. So that's a little bit of who Evergreen is. And I didn't do this earlier, but does anyone have any questions about this choice you made? Or were given. Evergreen was established in the early 2000s. So we are the youngest region in ABC. Yes. So if you're keeping track, that's right at the end of when the human sexuality wars got really bad. Well, so, yes.
How many people do you represent, or do we represent?
Yes, we have 54 churches in 5 states. So as far as people goes, it's about 12 to 15,000. We have several of what we would call almost mega churches, 3 to 5,000 members sort of thing. Yes?
So I think what I'm understanding, but I want to make sure that it's, doesn't matter your sexual orientation, what country, culture you're from, or even mental health issues. It's all kind of open to everyone.
Yes. Wholeheartedly.
And open to everyone's perspective from those places.
Yes, yes. And that freedom includes churches. We really do our best to be very Baptist about this. Each church has most of the freedom to decide what's best for them. But that freedom is on every level. So everyone in Evergreen has access to any of those. Yes?
Yeah, then how does it interact then with traditional Baptist church if you're just a different, how does it relate? How do you work together with them?
So we're
Views.
so we're an official region of American Baptist Churches USA, like every other one. So we participate in that way, which means that I have to go to the meetings, and we're part of American Baptist Women, we're part of American Baptist Men, we join international ministries, fully embedded in that sense. The way we participate is that we have a covenant with each other to say that each region has agreed to stand on Baptist principles when it comes to these issues. So no region could tell another what to do. So for example, the Dakotas is a very conservative region theologically. So we cannot go and tell them, maybe you ought to consider having this, but they can't do the same either. So we have what we call a covenant. Yeah.
In the, what do you call it, caucuses?
Caucuses?
Caucuses, is the LGBTQ represented?
No, we do not have an LGBTQ caucus because we feel we have that part of a community in every one of the caucuses. Does that make sense? So there's LGBTQ people in each of those groups. And we feel then that because many in our congregations feel that God has created people in that way, if we were to have an LGBTQ caucus, then we will have to have a cisgender caucus as well. And that feels, yeah. Yes?
So basically what I think what you're saying too is there's just no separation between LGBTQ, mental health, all those things. We have differences of opinion, and maybe that as far as the church goes, we're all one.
Yes. Yes, there's awareness, but not separation.
Right.
So we want to highlight that we are different. We want to appreciate that difference because we feel that there's a reason it exists. That we feel that God created that, so the way we look at it is that difference for us is God's gift for enrichment instead of trouble we have to do away with. I don't know if that explains it. We're good? So, I'm glad you're posting these sermons because I've been following through, and often my trouble is that I come and interrupt. what churches are doing and do my spiel. But I wanted to, your God Can't series has reminded me of something that was very important for me, an important discussion. I used to be in a group, TMI, Together in Ministry is the name of the group. It's a peer support group for clergy. And I used to be in a group, and my wife called that group the Smarty Pants group. And what this group did was, in essence, it was like a theology geek group, right? We would take these dense theology books and just live and love it. And you know, very few people care about that stuff, but we did profoundly. In that group, we read this one book from a philosopher. His name is Caputo. He's out of Villanova. And the name of the book is The Weakness of God. And your series brought me there, but I want to talk a little bit about that. We'll get into that a little later. First, I want to tell this question and living in faith brought me to this wondering about why is it that Jesus kept the disciples around? You know, why is it that, I mean, there were a lot of disciples that following Jesus, but we hear a lot about these 12. Now, my question is, why did Jesus keep these 12 around? Because they never really got it. You know, they were always confused by Jesus, and they were always asking him questions. They never got things, and there was always something wrong for them. Oh, we need a password for. We're locked out. But so they're walking with Jesus, they're living with Jesus, they're seeing what Jesus is doing, and they're always thinking, but is he really? Or why is he doing that? So I'll give you some examples here. They never seem to get Jesus' message, right? So for example, in Luke 9:55, what's happening there is that they have been rejected from a Samaritan town. A Samaritan town has rejected Jesus. And so they come to Jesus after being rejected, and they say, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? You know? In that excitement. You know? So Jesus is talking about love profoundly, love your neighbor, etc. And they're saying, burn them. Because they said no to us. How could they possibly say no to us? We're awesome. Look at us. Why would they say? I wonder what Jesus' facial expression was when they said that. Then, in John 13, we get to John 13, and then here again, Jesus is doing everything wrongly, right? So what happens here is this is when Jesus washes his people's feet. Now, in that culture, this was customary. You tended to wash people's feet when they came into your home. It was a courtesy you did for everyone. The difference was that the person who did that was the lowest in your household. It was a slave. If you didn't have a slave, the lowest of your servants. It was their job to wash people's feet because it was a demeaning act. So when Jesus does that, some of the disciples get angry. You know, they think, maybe they think they might be being demeaned by relationship. You know, people are going to think I'm a lowly servant if you do that. So Peter, when Jesus comes to Peter, and he's going to wash his feet, Peter says, you shall never wash my feet. I will not let you humiliate yourself in this way. Again, imagine Jesus' expression in response. Or maybe Mark 8:14. This comes right after Jesus has fed thousands of people, right? This is a story we hear of Jesus feeding thousands of people. And what's happened is they've gone on a boat away. In the boat, they realize that they forgot to bring bread with them, right? So this is a little conversation that's happening. They're talking about, ooh, we forgot the bread. What are we going to eat? I'm thinking, you just saw Jesus do that. I think he could do it again, but okay. So they get to a place, they have a fight with, Jesus has an encounter with Pharisees again, which happens often. They're always instigating Jesus, right? They want to catch him being wrong, or they want to catch him saying the wrong thing. So they always have those, so there's always an argument. So this argument happens, and then as soon as the argument ends, Jesus turns to his disciples, and I have a colleague in New York who she doesn't call them disciples, she calls them disciples. And so Jesus turns to the disciples and says, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. You know, in essence, you know, watch out, these people are instigating, they want to build things, they're putting this stuff, they want to blow things, they want to make things grow. And the disciples turn to each other and say, you see, we forgot the bread. Who didn't bring the bread? Why didn't we bring the bread? Because Jesus said leaven, and I guess he could only mean bread, because they didn't get it. And so Jesus says to them, why are you discussing the fact that we have no bread? That's not what I'm talking about. So they don't get it. The whole time, they just don't get it. It goes on like that. Matthew 8:27 is when Jesus calms the sea, and the disciples said, who is this man? As though they have never been with him. And so they keep not getting it over and over. In Matthew 15:16, Jesus seems to be tired, and it says, are you still without understanding? Are you not getting it? My question is, how is it that people who kept being so wrong got so much right? The disciples, right? How is it? And why did Jesus keep them around? And where I come to is that there's something about the gospel. There's a strength. I want to call it, I wrote, there's something about the power of the gospel. But when we hear power, I don't think we hear what the gospel does, right? There's something about the gospel that transforms from the inside, that is different. But I think the problem the disciples were having was they wanted the gospel to be very human. And the reason we love, because you see, we in the American church, we love the disciples. And we love specifically how the disciples kept telling Jesus how wrong he was. And I think we love that because of our enlightenment self. You know, our culture is very rooted in the Enlightenment. We're rooted in this idea that reason and persuasive arguments rooted in reason can change someone. Right? That if we just say the right words in the right way, the right argument with the right reasons, people will be changed. And if they're not changed, then we'll use brute force and beat them into it. Either way, we'll change them. Right? That's sort of that Enlightenment way. And our evangelical selves, our church selves, we also speak in the same way, right? But we speak from the different side. We talk about it in the way of conviction. I've been convicted. I'm struck down. I fell to my knees in surrender to God. We want that to sound beautiful, but it's still this brute force, beat 'em kind of thing that we want, right? We want Jesus to be the biggest bully in the yard. But Jesus has no time for that, or desire for it either. The gospel clearly teaches us that Jesus did not want to have anything to do with coercive or defeating power. So Jesus transformed us by, I think, what we call weakness. You know, Jesus goes away without a fight. Do you notice that? I mean, if you really want to live without Jesus, Jesus will go away. If you want to ignore Jesus, Jesus will go away without a fight. I mean, it's so bad that even when we're awful, so for example, in Germany or in Rwanda or in the Balkans, you know, all those places were 90% Christian. And all of those places ended up in genocide. They literally killed people, even though they were 90% Christian. So how are we to evangelize and share a Jesus who refuses to be the biggest bully in the playground? Because that's the Jesus we want to share, right? That's the Jesus our church shares. Come to the power of Jesus. Jesus wins. Jesus could strike you down into submission so that you surrender to Him. And that makes sense, right? Up until recently, up until the 60s, we could do that because we were the biggest bully in the play yard. The church in the United States told society what to do. We had the power to do that, right? We had what we call blue laws, right? You cannot do anything during church time. We told people how to dress. We told people how to talk. In the 50s, we added "In God We Trust" to money. We were the biggest bully. So we could enforce our faith. And then it makes sense. We could hit you across the head with the Bible until you surrender in your knees. But Jesus goes the other way. And that's hard. Because I don't know if you noticed, but since the 60s, the American church has aligned itself with the newest bully to see if we could recapture that power. So since the 60s, we have this tradition of joining with the bullies. So to see if we could bully society back into obeying us. It feels harsh, doesn't it? If you're offended, I hope so, but in the good way. Because, you see, Jesus wants the opposite. And this is what I mean by weakness. The Jesus way is different. It's difficult, it is slow, but it speaks to something profound. One way to find that is in St. Augustine in his Confessions. My favorite quote about St. Augustine is that he said to Jesus, he said to God, "God, please transform me into a better man, but not yet." His Confessions book is speaking of that struggle. He wants to be transformed because he knows he needs to be transformed, but he doesn't want it yet. And in that struggle is that he writes this: "My heart is restless until it rests in you." That's a different transformation. It doesn't say, "God, come beat me up. God, make me surrender. God, be a better warrior than I am so I lose to you and then maybe I might be changed." This one is different. This one, it says, "I have a longing. There's a somethingness in me that is searching. Would you please fill it?" And that's a profound thing. I spoke to you about the weakness of God. This quote is from Caputo, "In the weakness of God." And I think it speaks to this. It says, "The weak force of God settles down below in the hidden interstices of being." Now, as I said earlier, I think you probably have a better vocabulary than I, so I didn't know what interstices was. And interstice is, say you try to cover your eyes from light as much as you can, so that no light comes in. But there's just these little tiny bits of light that just sneak in, right? That's an interstice. It's a tiny little hole that sneaks in. So that's where the weak force of God settles. It insinuated into the obscure crevices of being. Like an ordo non ordinam, which is the disordering order of what disturbs being from within. Like an anarchic interruption that refuses to allow being to settle firmly into place. In other words, my heart is restless until it settles in you. There's something the matter, and I don't know what it is, but it's there, and I want to know what is it. Maybe our job as the church is to walk with those souls who haven't found rest, to encouraging listening to their anarchic interruptions that leads to search and transformation, right? To walk alongside, to live into life. Maybe we ought to rediscover our Eastern religion tradition, right? Maybe we ought to walk into that again, because right now we have a very Western religion tradition. You know, we as Americans, and we're very good at this, we took faith and we shaped it into who we are. And we sold it proudly and confidently, and boy, did it change things. As an example, we have people from Burma churches in Evergreen, and if you go to their worship services, you will not understand a word of what they say, but you will know all the hymns and the order of worship, because it's 1950s United States. Because that's what we told them was the right thing to do. Right, so, but maybe the answer is search together. So I think the disciples never got Jesus when he was with them because they kept on wanting Jesus to be fully human. They were seeing power through their human eyes. So whenever Jesus did something, their questions seemed to be, how are we going to win with that? That doesn't work. How are people going to respect you if you're washing feet? Everybody knows nobody respects the feet washers. Gosh, Jesus. Maybe that's where the expression comes. Jesus. What are you doing? Washing feet. But instead, what Jesus does is that he goes back to wasting his time with inconsequential people. Because Jesus has no time for this limiting power that just wants to be the strongest in the yard. Jesus has no desire for this limiting power that just wants to be able to beat everyone into submission, because that does nothing for transformation. That just makes the other one wait until they're stronger than you, so that they could be in charge. Now, we have been close to following Jesus in this country. We were so close. Right at the end of the Civil War, when one of my favorite disciples, Lincoln, he was the winner. Everyone knew he was going to win. When he started, everyone thought he was not going to win. They wanted him out. They wanted nothing to do with Lincoln. Now he's winning. Everybody knows the South is going to lose, and this is victory. And in his victory speech, he closes this way: with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see that right, let us strive to finish the work we're in. And this is where it gets very Christian. To bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. He's won. He could stick it to him. The people in the North wanted the South to pay. The people in the South wanted the North to go. Lincoln could have been human and stuck it to them, make sure they never rise again, destroy them. And instead, he says, his plan is, I want to love them so much that they want to be in relationship with us. This is the winner saying to the losers, you matter profoundly to me. So I want to do the best I can to care for you so that we become us. He got it. And we killed him. Because we couldn't live with that. That is the weakness of God. So profound, so all-encompassing, that drives us to love the other. And I think it was Lincoln who said this, and I'm paraphrasing, the best way to defeat an enemy is to make him your friend. And he was following through with that. And I think what he was doing was quoting Jesus. The best, love thy enemy as yourself. And that's what we had, and if I may, I could close with a warning that Jesus gave to everyone about how difficult this was going to be. He called the crowd and his disciples and said to them, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. We think that's beautiful because we're living on the other side of the cross. That the cross has been cleansed by Jesus. But when Jesus said this, he hadn't been crucified yet. He wasn't even accused. In other words, when Jesus said this, all they knew about the cross was that it was for the worst of criminals. All they knew about the cross was that it was for undesirables, unpatriots. So, Jesus clearly said, if anyone wants to follow me, you must love those which we hate. And that is an argument from weakness. I have one more story, and then we finish. When I was pastoring a church, in Pennsylvania. This was a town in the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. They're the like old money kind of wealthy, the ones who couldn't spend all their money even if they tried. Now, our town was no longer that. We were, in essence, where the help lived. All the wealthy people had moved out. So what happened was then that the police department one day decided to do a safety check. The thing sort of they do at 2 in the morning in most places, for alcohol, DUIs, etc. But they were doing this between 5:30 and 7 p.m. So it really wasn't a safety. It was, in essence, it was against all of the undocumented expats who were coming back from doing lawns and cleaning this, and they were driving back because they have to drive home. And then they decided to do this checkpoint right in front of our church and use our parking lot to put the cars that they were impounding. Somebody calls me and says, Pastor, they're using our parking lot to put impounded cars. So I go there. I stand there and I say, I'm the pastor of the church. What are you doing? You can't use our parking lot as your impound lot. And the police officer says, if you were the pastor of the church, you would know that we've been doing this for years and it's been fine. So I thought, wait, why would I tell you I'm the pastor of the church in front of the church in broad daylight and not be the pastor? It seems like the worst thing to deal with the problem. It was anyway, so he and I had this big fight. And I didn't include the end before, but here's the end. He and I are going at it. He's telling me how wrong I am. There's nothing I could do to convince him, this lieutenant. And then as we're doing this, across the street, it's a councilman. He's just walking because I guess he saw this stuff. So he's across the street. He can't hear what we're saying, so my guess is he's thinking we're chatting. So he just says, "Hi, Lieutenant so-and-so. Hi, Pastor Doug," and keeps walking. Police officer says hi to the man, and then says, "Now, how could we work this out?" Right? So he fixed it for me. But here's the thing that I wanted to tell you about. Ever since I had this argument, for the next months, a police cruiser just happened to be in our parking lot whenever we had an event. Coincidence. They said it was a convenient spot for their officer, so there was always one there, but especially, so you could imagine, we had an English as a second language class that was specifically for the people they were targeting. You could imagine what happened to our attendance once there was a police officer in our parking lot. Our leadership was furious. We had the Constitution in our side. We're going to call our lawyer. We're going to go to the chief, tell him we're going to sue them, and we're going to tell all the media outlets. So not only are they going to lose in the court system, they're going to be embarrassed for what they did. And we had the right. We were the strongest in the yard at that time. So we struggled with that for a while, and then we settled in the opposite. And I was very tempted. Having been the one who he didn't even believe I was a pastor, I would have loved to have seen him lose and be on the winner's side. It was very tempting. But instead what we did was, we said, you know what, from now on, every time there's a police cruiser in our parking lot when we have an event, we want everyone coming to the event to go to the police officer, say your name, ask him for his, thank him for protecting us, and invite him inside. So there were times where there was a line of 10 people by the cruiser, all waiting to say, "Hi, officer, my name is so-and-so. What's your name? Thank you so much for protecting us. Would you like to come inside for some coffee?" And our idea was, we're going to love them. We're going to love them so much that they're going to either be annoyed because we're doing this or don't want to be there anymore. By coincidence, I think, about 2 weeks after we started doing this, our parking lot was not as convenient anymore for the police cruiser. We won through weakness. Because if we had taken them to court, we would have won. And we would have hated each other. And we would have been at war forever on. In this way, you know what happened instead? This way, we started getting calls from the police department. Whenever they wanted to talk to the community, they would say, "Can we meet at your church? Because that's a safe space." We won. But that's the wrong way to call it, right? Instead, we came closer to the other. That showed faith. I think that's where God wants us to go. That's the weakness of God. If we are engaged in this, "I'm going to be stronger than you," we're going to lose, especially when we win. But if we love so profoundly that the other person says, "I think this crazy person actually loves me and doesn't even know me. What's wrong with them?" I mean, isn't that great? I mean, if somebody goes away from you saying, "I don't know what weird cult that is, because those people love everybody and they don't even know how much of a jerk I am." Right? Imagine the transforming power of the gospel when people see churches as places where they are actually loved. Not for what they are or for what they're not, but they're just loved. And the transformation that we wanted to lead ourselves, let's just leave that to Jesus. We do the loving. Jesus does the transforming. And if we do that, I think no one is going to If we do that, I think we could say, come as you are, leave transformed. Right? But Jesus does that part. So in closing then, what I would say is we're as separated as we've ever been in our country. We're at a point where the lines are drawn and the battle is raging. We could choose a side and say, come to the right side of history or be destroyed. Or we could choose a side and say, can I tell you why I love you? And walk from there. Engage with the other side in love, not to beat them, but to win together. So what we say then in Evergreen is show up, always show up. Stand firm. Be clear, these things are wrong. That is racist. This is prejudice. Be clear. And love profoundly. All, especially the one you're fighting. Show up, stand firm, love profoundly, repeat as necessary. Amen.
Oh, very good. Hey, let's pray together. Thank you, Doug. That was really great. On lots of different levels. It's going to mess with us for a while, I think. Let's pray together, then we can be on with our day. So, God, thank you for Doug, and thank you for his leadership of Evergreen, a new model, a different way forwards, a way that respects other voices and still maintains unity. It's beautiful. And thank you for the message that he brought today, the message of Jesus, which is still countercultural and still counterintuitive. And we are still the disciples. And I pray that we won't be as much as we were after hearing today, but that we will be aware of your voice speaking to us and your love drilling down to the deepest recesses of our being. That your love would begin to disrupt and rattle us, unsettle us, so that we won't find ourselves just another expression of the dominant culture, but rather truly countercultural, coming from your love and your grace that you taught us. So help us be those people. Help us do the challenging thing of loving another, and particularly our enemies. That your transformative power would be at work in both of us, because we are, at the end of the day, brothers and sisters. Be with us, God, as we go out of here. Help us be the agents you called us to be in the world, to bring about the change you'd want to see based on your love. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any feedback for us or offering, whatever, just put those on the table in the receptacle, and we will see you next week. Thanks for coming.